Boom! We're here.
There we
What's
are.
up? Bushido,
Jumping
take it away.
right into it. So what up, y'all? So this is our new kind of experiment to doing some media criticism along with some class analysis, along with talking about just like cool sci-fi shit that everyone should be reading and watching. So as you all know, I'm Bushido Squirrel. I've got my co-host Chris Roth here. How you doing, Chris?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
And then,
oh, wait, you already
I'm
said you're doing
well.
all right.
Yeah, I'm doing well. That hasn't changed. And then we also have Logan Chance here. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing excellent. How are you guys all doing? I've got beer. I can't complain.
I have a very whiskey sour, and I think Chris has wine.
I do. It's a Syrah. It's tasty.
Exactly.
Very, very
Oh
fitting
my God.
to
It's
each
so
of our...
apropos.
For those of you
here we
wondering
go.
what these little logos are, if you haven't tuned into The Expanse, if you've never seen it before, we're kind of going to be looking at this series through the lens of the different major factions. So I'm going to be representing the UNN, which is kind of Earth. Logan's going to be doing the Outer Planet Alliance, which is like kind of the working class. Exactly. And then Chris is going to be the Martian Congressional Republic. See, I finally got that one. Who's
You
sort
did.
of like
You got it right.
They're kind of like the imperial settler colonialists, but we're going to be getting into that like real quick. So before we go into that, though, I wanted to ask the both of you before we go, what is it about The Expanse that has like drawn you to it and kept you to it? And I'm going to go to Logan first because he's new.
What really drew me to The Expanse was, I mean, really, it just came down to, because it started on Sci-Fi, even though it's now on Amazon, but I was a huge fan of Battlestar Galactica, and so when I saw trailers for it, I went, oh, okay, so they're going to try and take another run at Battlestar. Okay, I'm in. Let's go. Let's get into it. And then, what's kept me there is, just with, the kind of games that I play and a lot of the books that I read, not to, be punerific about it, but the expanse of The Expanse and just the way that it has just these different factions, but you always feel like they're distinct. And these are, different groups of people with varying levels of power and those power dynamics that are constantly shifting. So that's always just appealed to me.
Oh, Bushido, you gotta unmute yourself.
Yeah, what So what about you, Chris?
For me, I mean, I've always been like a huge sci-fi fan. Since I remember watching Star Trek growing up. Like Star Trek Next Generation was on in my family's house in the evenings. I don't remember if it was every week or what the story was, but I do remember. I vividly remember watching Star Trek Next Generation with my parents in the living room from when I must have been like 6 when we first started watching it or something like that, or maybe it was earlier than that. It was honestly one of my earliest childhood memories is most coherent childhood memories is watching that and falling in love with it. And I've probably seen every single thing that involves Jean-Luc Picard, and that just was a very formative thing for me. Actually, I would actually probably say that Geordi LaForge was more formative for me.
Right.
The whole like being an engineer and being able to fix things kind of absolutely determined my future path in life. And then when I got it was always like a separate thing because it was like, oh, they've got transporters. Oh, they've got like these phasers that you can just switch over, set to sun, and go, poof, and then the person just falls over. Great. And replicators, super cool.
That moves very slowly, like the world's slowest laser.
It does.
Slow enough where you can go like this and duck out of the way of a beam of light.
Exactly. But all of that fantasy aspect aside, it was the philosophy of it that really drew me in. But it sold me on sci-fi as a genre that I would definitely be addicted to. And I also was a huge fan of Battlestar Galactica when it came through. And I don't remember how I first heard about The Expanse, but as soon as I started watching it, I was just hooked like that. Because I was just like, oh, this is, after working at SpaceX for 8 years of my life, seeing something like The Expanse, I'm like, This is a sci-fi show that gets how space travel works.
Yeah.
What? Like, sci-fi doesn't do space travel correctly. It's just not practical on any television set, and that seeing it done so well was what drew me in, with a couple of exceptions, and we'll get into those, when we start talking about the actual episodes, because I am not a fan of the fact that when Miller pours a drink, the water or the whiskey or whatever does like a fucking loop-de-loop. It's like, that's not how this works. God damn it. But they did do better jobs with the other thing that is like a super like pet peeve of mine. You remember the movie Gravity, where
Yes.
Sandra Bullock is exhausted and then she cries and a tear goes bing and it just floats off toward the camera? That shit is not how it works. However, in The Expanse, when in season 3, when Tilly gets like a through the middle and she's crying and her eyes are just covered in moisture, that's how it works. If you cry, you get goggles of tears and you can't see clearly because you're underwater inside of your own tears on your eyeballs. And the fact that they like gave a shit about those kind of details really was what sold me on it and kept me in it. And then I was just like, oh, hey, I'm a socialist at this point in my life after learning about things. And this is class warfare in space. And that really like drew me in so hard. But Squirrel, what about you? What was it that got you hooked on this stuff in the first place?
So, I mean, like both of you, I watched a lot of Star Trek, and I also was a huge Battlestar Galactica fan. I still think Battlestar Galactica was really like a turning point for like hard sci-fi really becoming a cultural phenomenon outside of the like monster of the week model that Star Trek had. But beyond that, what really drew me into The Expanse was the way that it melds hard sci-fi, like the realities of like having to exist in space, what that would mean, but then also the way in which like the same issues that we deal with now would be amplified and replicated. Like when we talk about The Expanse and the conflicts that we're going to be exploring and the themes we're going to be exploring here, they're not much different from what we're looking at in 21st century hypercapitalism. And I'm glad we all mentioned Star Trek, because what we're going to do now is I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between the books and the TV show, but then we're going to go into the timeline. And if you only really know like Star Trek The Next Generation and like sort of are familiar with that, The Expanse is technically taking place in the 24th century, the exact same time Jean-Luc Picard is doing his thing. So
that's so wild to me. Oh,
exactly.
Logan, your video is crapping out.
Yeah.
But so what we see with The Expanse is a much more realistic look at how humanity will progress and how humanity could actually go to the planets in our solar system, and what a huge lift that is. Like, there is no Zephyrin Cochrane. I mean, there is, but it's not like Zephyrin Cochrane in the Expanse universe allows us to travel to other stars. He just lets us get to, like, Jupiter within a lifetime, which would be a huge leap forward. But so let's go ahead and talk real quick about the Expanse as a TV show and book. So The Expanse is a series of books. It's going to be 9 books in total. Right now, they've released 8 of them. And then we've also got 5 seasons that we just finished up the 5th season on the TV show, which, as Logan mentioned, it started off on Sci-Fi. Sci-Fi kind of went kaputski, and then Amazon went ahead and bought The Expanse's continued production. Now, the actual author on The Expanse is listed as James S.A. Corey. And James S.A. Corey is a pen name for 2 authors, for Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. And this is one thing about The Expanse that I think really makes it stand out from a lot of the ways we think about sci-fi. As we tend to think about like Asimov and Banks and Bradbury and all of these other like single authors who have like a big oeuvre. Like, you think about Philip K. Dick and his brand of sci-fi. And The Expanse is really a collaborative project. And that's one reason I think it has a lot more legs and it has a lot more depth. And has a lot more character development, because like the characters, the worlds they live in feel much more fleshed out. The TV show, it looks like is going to wrap up next season. So we're going to get 6 full seasons of The Expanse, telling a pretty cool story that's kind of contained within the solar system that we exist within. The TV show has, for a lot of reasons, had to cut some corners, consolidate some stuff, change some plot points around, because like as we all know, like Logan, you do production, I'm a video editor, like it's a lot cheaper to write words than it is to put those words on screen. Because that's just the way production works. Like it just you can write a 1,500 word book. Turning that into a really good TV show that covers all those plot points is a lot harder, as all of us demoralized Game of Thrones fans found out. In my opinion, you should definitely go and read the books. They're really quick reads. They're really good. They're very, very interesting. They're really thick. If you want to do it on audiobook, they're like really exciting and fun to follow along with. The TV show, though, is also really good just because I think they've done a great job capturing that universe and really making it like a 3D thing and something you can really dip into. But for the purpose of this show and like the episodes we're going to be doing here on Beltalouder for the people in the back, we're only going to be covering the TV show. Like, the books will probably be mentioned here and there, but we're really not focusing on them. So if you're thinking about, like, what kind of homework do I need to do to keep up with this show, you literally just have to watch the shows. And, like, you can get them all on Amazon Prime. They're all available if you have a Prime subscription. If you don't feel like paying for Amazon Prime, there are most definitely nod, wink, wink, other ways to watch The Expanse online that I'm not going to say because
allegedly.
Yeah, exactly. There are probably other
I've heard
ways
tales
for you
foretold.
Yes, there are probably other ways for you to experience it. I would highly suggest you do, either before or after watching this. Even if you've seen it before, hopefully we're going to explore some themes and talk about stuff in like ways that you may not have thought of or ways that you may not have considered or ways that you just might want to explore more. So hopefully this is like a conversation between us and you and ways for y'all to like explore this very interesting series through the lens of us also exploring this interesting series. So, you know, if you're on Twitch, if you're on Periscope, wherever you're watching, go ahead and hop into the chat. Get lively in there. Feel free to ask us questions. We're more than happy to chat about it and also research some stuff. We'll be here every Friday at 7 p.m. And then once we wrap this about hour-long stream, I'm probably going to play some video games. I'm not sure if Chris and Logan want to stick around for that. They can. But we're just going to kind of fuck around on Friday nights because we're all stuck at home for a very long while. For more information on that, tune into the podcast Mondays at 7. But
Very well
anyways,
done.
I love that plug.
Exactly.
Very well
exactly. Exactly. You always have to be pushing the brand. This is what I've learned from running, you know, doing this for 4 years. But so let's go ahead and talk about timelines a little bit here. And before we talk about timelines, how we're going to do this, and I haven't really cleared this with Chris and Logan before, but so we're going to go through this timeline, and as it becomes relevant, I'm going to pull them in to talk about their faction. So. Great. I'm representing Earth, which exists under the United Nations. And you might be wondering, how did the one world government come to be? And I'm glad you asked that question. So in the 2040s and 2050s, the world started coming out of a period of extreme conflict and environmental degradation. You know, this is within our lifetimes pretty much. But in 2035, Mars was officially colonized for the first time, and people began going to Mars and began setting up the way in which they would live. And Chris, you can talk a little bit about what it's like to live on Mars.
Well, okay, sure. As we've all learned, and I am so mad at you for making me realize that this is canon. If you've watched the movie The Martian, life when you live on Mars sucks a lot in the early days. Apparently, it's actually pretty good. By the time that the TV show gets there, things are pretty good. But the Mars Congressional Republic is basically, what's the best way? It's a quasi-fascistic state where you exist solely for the benefit of Mars. Like, yeah. It is nationalism on a scale that is just basically unthinkable in our world right now, where literally everything is done for Mars with a long-term dream and a multi-generational dream. I think that they actually referred to it in one of I think it was the 4th season, where the comparison is made to the Gothic cathedrals, the construction of the Gothic cathedrals, where the original builders who laid the first stones did so knowing that they would never live to see the completion of the project, and that what they were doing was for their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren and so on and so forth. And that's exactly what is going on with how Mars is constructed. It is a multi-generational project with the goal of terraforming Mars, and the eventual goal, as you know, there's a great line in season one of people talking about how great it would have been to have seen an ocean on Mars. And that's their final words from this character. And that's the whole thing. It's all about the dream of turning Mars from a desolate, uninhabitable, lifeless hellscape, which it currently is, and is when Matt Damon goes and turns into an extremely emaciated version of himself, a la The Machinist, and just has to eat shit potatoes for a long time. But he was apparently the first colonizer, and the entire process is colonization. They are very upfront about that. They don't actually mention Elon in the Expanse, which is nice. I did appreciate at the time that I was working at SpaceX, it got mentioned. The author of The Martian came in and gave a talk because we could do that as because of Elon's connections of the billionaire class, right? Zubrin also came in, and Zubrin actually has some of the most interesting things to say about like the whole how do we get to Mars, how do we make colonies on Mars, how do we settle it, and realistically, he has the best handle on how all of that would work with modern technology. But the author of The Martian basically said that had SpaceX existed, the entire plot point of his book wouldn't have made sense because we would have had more access to space and they wouldn't have had to wait so long, which is a lot more faith in the existence, in the capitalist structure than I would necessarily give it. But I do think that there was a bit of an underestimation of how quickly things were going to progress. But I have mixed feelings about my time at SpaceX, and don't get me started on the Starship explosions.
Yeah.
The explosions are actually like in the process of learning how to do something that has literally never been done before, and it's not just blowing up a spacecraft for the sake of blowing up a spacecraft. There is a method to the madness, but Elon is also a massive fucking asshole.
Yes.
You can separate the two.
But
the engineers that I worked with were awesome. Anyway.
Yeah. But so during this period of time, like while people are beginning to colonize Mars from 2035 on out, Earth is sort of like getting closer and closer to unification. Luna, the moon, is also being colonized. We're building spaceports and stuff up there because it's a lot easier to build large structures and spaceships in less gravity. Like, it just makes a lot more sense. We're also beginning to mine near-Earth asteroids for resources. We're mining the moon for asteroids. We're doing all of the fun extractive stuff we do here on Earth, but just like on other celestial bodies. Now, 60 years after the colonization of Mars, Earth finally gets its shit together, and the UN becomes the de facto world government, and the UN Secretary General goes from being like sort of a ceremonial position to the actual like president of the planet. Like, that's the person who is now essentially running the planet. Now, there's a race for technology between Mars and Earth going on because Mars is like pretty independent. Around the 2100 mark, they hit about 13 million people living on Mars, which you got to consider for like 65 years of development is pretty big. We're looking at about 25 billion people on the planet Earth. And what's happening on Earth is that we're running out of jobs. Automation is taking over. AI is like very big. You just don't need as many humans to do as much and produce as much work. Global climate change has really devastated a lot of the planet, so people tend to live in megacities. They don't have access to work. There's sort of a UBI scheme that most people live on. If you want to get just a basic job, an apprenticeship, you've got to apply and like work your way through a whole program. Some people sit on these waiting lists for like 50, 60, 70 years for their entire lives. And during this time, human life is expanding. So human life is going from an average lifespan of like 72 up to the 140s, up to the 160s, up to the 180s by the time we get to the start of the book. So people live for a much longer period of time, which means it's a much heavier logistical lift to get people stable, to provide for them for that entire life. Now, Mars begins jockeying for independence around the 2150 mark. And then it was the Epstein drive was invented, I want to say like 2125. And that's what Mars essentially uses to get itself free from the Earth. And Chris, maybe you can explain what the Epstein drive is, at least theoretically. Like, obviously, this isn't science that exists now, but why does the Epstein drive matter in the books?
So the reason why the Epstein drive matters in the books is that you're able to go a lot further and accelerate for a lot longer on a lot less fuel. Like it's basically he took the engines that they were using before, which was some kind of a fusion based reactor system, and he was able to crank the hell out of the efficiency on it and transformed what you know if you're traveling in space. You ideally want to be accelerating the entire time at a level that is comfortable if you're doing a human based system, you want to be accelerating at around 1g the whole time so that you can create effectively artificial gravity just by acceleration. And then you want to then flip and turn around and do the exact same thing in the other direction, decelerating at 1g, and that way you continue to feel as though you are on the Earth, standing and walking around on your spaceship. That's why they're all like skinny and tall, and everybody's heads are pointing toward the front of the ship.
Well, I do want to mention this. So when we think about spaceships, we think of like the Enterprise, right? Where it's laid out where everyone's walking on the floor this way, and the ship is oriented this way. But actually, the ships are oriented up and down, and people are walking this way. So it's more like living in a skyscraper than it is like living on a strip of land. And that's part of the realism of it, because hey, Chris, if you accelerate real fast, is that good for the human body?
No, it's very bad. You can stroke out. Literally, a blood clot will go in your brain and you'll die. And that's the story behind the inventor of the Epstein drive. Is he was tinkering around with an engine, did the thing that tinkering people do, and decided to go on a test run, and did not do his calculations correctly, in the sense that he was wildly conservative, and then he killed himself by virtue of just being too good of an engineer, apparently. Not my life goal, but it worked for him and made him a ton of money, and made sure that his wife was going to live forever, happily ever after, as one of the richest people in the universe. But the point is, so I would actually argue that most of these things are less like a skyscraper and more like a home in the Netherlands, like one of those Dutch like townhomes that are super skinny and everything's like very tall and like narrow spaces. So you're constantly climbing ladders or stairs to get from one floor to the next, because that's what you do. So the point is that to burn the fuel and to keep running like that at a constant acceleration from one point to the next is very fuel intensive, and you just literally can't do it. The only way we can do it right now is with like an ion drive, which just does not put out anywhere near 1g of acceleration. But that's the idea behind this drive, is that you could do 1g of acceleration for basically forever with a standard fuel load, and that changed literally everything.
So go ahead and pull up that solar map, because we're going to pull Logan here in a second.
Yeah, let's take a look.
So this is why the Epstein drive matters in terms of we as humans and how we interact with the solar system around us. So
there we go.
Sure.
That big glowing ball, that's the sun. And that one band that you can kind of see, let's zoom in a little bit. There we go. So now we can see Venus, and we can see Earth, and we can see Mars. And Mars and Earth, they're like pretty close together, right? Like that's an easy trip. Zoom out to Jupiter real quick.
It's an easy trip here. It's less of an easy trip if Earth is here and Mars is like over there. But
let's zoom out to Jupiter real quick, and let's look at the trip from Earth to Jupiter. So suddenly, with the Epstein drive, we can start colonizing the belt of asteroids that lies between Mars and Jupiter. We can start colonizing the moons around Jupiter. We can start colonizing all of these huge celestial bodies, which leads to the rise of the belt. And at this point, just to let everyone know, there's about 4 billion people on the planet Mars. There's about 25 billion people on the planet Earth. Stuff's getting a little bit crowded. So Logan, where do people start going?
They start going to the belt, and that's a region where work is plentiful. Not so much pay, but there's definitely work. Or water. And where air there. Out in the belt, they're basically paid in air and water, and just the basic functions to survive. And so with the OPA, it is basically the workers getting organized, and so they're immediately branded terrorists. Just immediately, shocker of shockers. And So through that, I just remember in one of these first two episodes, it was brought up. If the first water shipment is missing, there's protests. If the second water shipment is missing, people die, and that is a leverage that Earth and Mars use to keep the workers in line. And so with the OPA, it is the people saying we aren't going to fucking take it anymore, and but another part, with the Belters that's quite interesting is, after a generation of living in zero G or very little gravity relative to even Mars, much less Earth, is that their bodies become incapable of being on Earth, to where literally being outside of a water tank is considered torture. And we know that because Avasarala tortured somebody in the very first episode, and it is just them realizing, we were told at some point we would make enough money to go home. Well, we no longer have a home to go to. Our home is in the belt, and the belt is ours, and we're not going to just let you, run roughshod over us. But they also don't have money or resources, but what they do have is labor and people who are tough enough to survive, because a lot of people die doing this work. And a lot of people, and the people who do survive, are considered gods among mortals, because, really think about it, how long does it take in this series before you see an old Belter? And it's almost until the most recent season that you do see an old Belter. And so this is a young working class who know that their lives are the only currency they have. And so they use that currency to get organized and to start flipping the script on the existing power structures. But it's going to cost a lot of lives.
And it's one of these things that's very interesting, too, because the belt doesn't really have a government. Like Mars has a government, Earth has a government, but the belt doesn't. Instead, what's happened is sort of this hyper-capitalism where deeds and leases are given to Earth and Mars corporations. Now, Mars corporations, you can think of this more like the state capitalism of the current Chinese government, where like their corporations are more state enterprises. On Earth, it's more like an ANCAP's paradise, where you have a corporation, that corporation wants to develop and exploit resources out on the belt. You give them a lease to like ownership and running and control of these very far-flung places, because even at best, it's a couple months trip from Earth out to the belt. Like it takes some time. It even takes 20, 30 minutes for communications to get from the belt to Earth, because like, hey, Chris, how fast can things travel?
The speed of light.
Exactly. And the speed of light, it takes some time. You don't think about this, but it takes 8 minutes for a photon to get from the sun to your eye. Now, to just like also make that a little bit wacky, it takes 1,000,000 years from that photon to get from the center of the sun out to be shot out to your eye in 8 minutes. But that's a different branch of physics that we're not going to deal with. But it takes some time to get around. So we've ceded sovereignty to corporations, and these corporations run the massive landmarks that make up the belt. Things like Ceres Station, which is one of the Jovian moons. Things like Eros, which is another an extrasolar body where there's a lot of resources and a lot of people live. But for most Belters, they don't vote on anything. They don't have any democratic process in their lives. They're just sort of born into a capitalist nightmare controlled by the UNN or run by the Martian government. And you also think, well, hey, can't I get like a spaceship and just go out there and mine some moon rocks and like pull some gold out of an asteroid and go sell that? And you're like, well, you could, except we have, like trade agreements enforced by people with guns from Mars and Earth who don't want you, the Belter, to be able to make as much money as you could possibly make. So every level of a Belter's life is essentially controlled by who they call the inners, i.e. Earth as sort of the corporations, and Mars as the kind of like neo-imperial power. And Chris, go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly interject and point out that Ceres is actually a dwarf planet that exists in the asteroid belt.
You got me.
It is actually round, which is cool. but it's 14 times less massive than Pluto,
Yeah.
which is saying something. So there's like almost no gravity there. It's definitely it is the largest. It comprises 25% of the mass of the asteroid belt, so it's way bigger than anything else in the belt. But it was not able to turn into a planet because of Jupiter. Jupiter was just like pulling all that stuff and keeping it all loosey-goosey, as it were, and didn't allow for the accretion of enough mass into a single body to form a planet. But even if it did have enough mass around to form into a planet, it would still be very, 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 very tiny, and would probably not actually. Well, it would have made things interesting from an astronomical perspective, in terms of planet classifications. But it's considered to be a dwarf planet, the same as Pluto, so it doesn't get named in the whole "my very excellent mother just baked us 9 pies" or whatever the fucking thing is. Served us 9 pies. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I just had a flashback to third grade.
The pies got dropped. There's no more pies. But yeah, so Ceres is the largest thing in the asteroid belt, and you actually start off with the first episode of this show talking about the fact that Ceres was had enough water on it, at least in this universe, to supply Belters with water for 1,000 generations, as they put it, because obviously you have to recycle everything if you're living in space. And they recycle people too. You turn into mushroom food when you die. But the water on Ceres is taken by the inner planets to do their colonial projects. So basically, like, that's the baseline of where the OPA is coming from. Is there was a paradise as far as the OPA populace was concerned, a potential paradise in terms of raw resources. And we got to scale it back. It's not like a solar punk future here on Earth. This is very dystopian hellspace. But there were enough resources in Ceres to last for a long time. But it was all stripped away by the Earth and Mars Corps to help with the terraforming of Mars, and just the lining of the pocketbooks of the oligarchs on Earth. And that was my one little.
Oh, go ahead, Logan.
Oh, and Chris, to kind of jump on that, as far as kind of what was underlying the pilfering of all of that water, at least in the case of Earth, is Earth had a massive fucking climate catastrophe, and the implication being it fucked all their resources up and resulted in them just
they never have anything happening in Florida. There is no Florida mentioned.
There is no Florida.
There is, but also New York is surrounded by seawalls because the sea levels have risen so high, but there's also no sea life on Earth. All the things we're talking about now, the 2 degrees centigrade that we're trying to avoid, we didn't avoid that, and all of that shit fucked everything up. Humans were able to survive the climate apocalypse because we have technology, and we're able to rebound and thrive through the use of megacities. But those megacities require an input of resources that we don't have here on the Earth. So for a while, we were extracting that from Mars, and then Mars was like, you know what, fuck you. We got the Epstein drive. We're going to make some stealth tech. We're going to build some nuclear missiles. We're going to get into a mutually assured destruction sort of thing with the planet Earth, just so you guys don't fuck with us anymore. And so the planet Earth, along with the Martians, began building massive solar mirrors, solar reflectors around the moon of Ganymede, which is one of the moons around Jupiter. Yes. I know that one. One of the 80-some-odd moons around Jupiter. And what those
the Jovian system is nuts.
Yes, it's essentially a solar system in and of itself. Just a hard break here real quick. If you want to read about an entire sci-fi universe that takes place around a gas giant, read The Algebraist by Ian M. Banks. It's fucking trippy as hell. But Jupiter in and of itself is a mini solar system. And so we build these giant solar reflectors and solar collectors that take what little sunlight comes out there and reflects it down into greenhouses to grow all of the food for the rest of the solar system, essentially. Much like we have rural America, or the Romans had their far-flung rural agrarian provinces to feed the metropolitan Rome. That same thing's happening here. The food for the belt, the food for Mars, the food for Earth is not grown on any of those planets or any of those asteroid belts. It's grown on Ganymede and then shipped around. So these become points of contention. Basically, by 2260 or so, things become a little bit more heated. Mars and Earth are both jockeying for position, trying to decide like who's going to be the dominant power. Remember, even though we're like one species, we're in one solar system, there's still those same politics of domination, of hegemony that are still going on. There's some big freaking navies out there flying around. There's billions of people that need to eat, that need to have a place to take a poop, that need to be able to drink some water. They also want jobs. All of those same dynamics are still happening. And so that brings us up to around the 22nd century when all of this stuff is beginning to happen. So the books sort of begin in like the 2260s. And that's when something interesting is found in an extrasolar body. And scientists begin to fuck around with this. And as we always know, scientists fucking around with things always goes good places for all of us and never kills millions of people through experimentation. But yeah, I wanted to kind of dial in the timeline there for anyone who's kind of curious. And from here, we can talk about the class war aspects. But Chris, I think you want to play around with the solar map a little bit more.
Yeah, I just wanted to show everybody. So the extrasolar object that we're talking about. So this is the sun here in the middle. Not the middle of the screen anymore, but in the middle of the rings that represent the elliptical orbits of the planets. They're not circles, people. They are ellipses. That's how this works. But yeah, so Earth and Mars pretty near to each other, and it's like a 20-something minute broadcast delay, I believe, on average for light to travel, for signals to travel from Earth to Mars. But it varies very much depending upon where in the orbital cycle they are. And the Jovian moons that we were talking about for Ganymede and everything are out here around Jupiter, and that is feeding the belt, and the belt exists in this space between Mars and Jupiter. I'm going to try to find a better thing to represent all of this, and I'm hoping that it exists out there. So Phoebe, this extrasolar object that is the root of all of the everything going very not good in this entire plot line of this series, is it's an extrasolar object that got caught in the orbit around Saturn. And so I think it's worth pointing out to everybody that Saturn actually is the second largest planet in the system, and Jupiter is just shy of enough mass to actually turn itself into a sun. It's significantly smaller than...
So close.
But it's significantly smaller than the sun itself, but it is the next closest thing to a sun in our solar system. And then Saturn is also just fucking huge. But Phoebe is it exists as a it's an extrasolar body that is trapped into the orbit of Saturn, and it exists basically like it's a moon. What's the name of that station that they run off to in the end of season 1?
Tycho.
No. Tycho is sorry. The name of
Palace.
Was it Palace?
Yeah, Palace. There's Palace Station is the main trade hub. Tycho Station is like the jewel of the belt,
Eros.
like the really Eros Station. Oh yeah.
Eros. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Does it? Hey, look, bingo! I can find Eros. Apparently Eros is around Jupiter. Wait,
yes.
What? Camera lock to Jupiter. Unlock the camera. Go to... Nope. Asteroid 433, Eros. No! There it is. So you can actually see the orbit of Eros is this one. It's this pink thing. That is Eros. So you can see where Eros is floating. So it is another thing in the belt, although it's actually not in the belt. It floats. It orbits between Earth and Mars, and then it actually orbits outside of the orbit of Mars before it loops back in, because not everything is super centered around the sun. The sun just happens to be at one of the centroids within the, or one of the foci. I don't know how to say these things. Of the ellipse.
I've only read it.
Fair enough. But yeah, so that's where Eros is. Eros is the station where the shit really goes down in season 1. But I just wanted to like point out where everything is at for people because that is a worthwhile little thing. I think I can add in. Can I add in Ceres? Yes, I can. So hey, look at that! I've got the orbit of Ceres. So you can see where Ceres exists between Jupiter and Mars, how it has a more centralized orbit. Oh, I'm so happy about this tool. But yeah, that was what I wanted to interject here before we get back into it. So yeah, that was all I had.
Nice.
So,
All right.
where,
Sorry, one sec. I'm having some technical difficulties. Give me 1 second.
it's all good. I can go back and futz around with the solar system. Let's see. Can I add other things in here?
There we go. I fixed it. But so here's where I wanted to go with this one. I wasn't just having Chris fuck around with stars for no reason. But what I wanted to lay out here is as far as the kind of class warfare goes, like what we're talking about and why we feel like ultimately we can analyze the Expanse through a Marxist lens and a lens of like dialectical materialism and not be completely like talking out of our asses is because these themes are really important. So I'm going to go to Logan real quick to talk about like what does the OPA want? What's the OPA looking for? How do they fit into this like class struggle analysis that I'm setting up?
I mean, really what the OPA wants is self-determination. And what their struggle is that you have, you know, two massive governmental entities that basically use corporations as proxies to keep them in line. And so for them, you know, with resources being, you know, at an all-time low for them, and I mean, it's honestly quite similar to Fiji water, with the way that the workers of Fiji water have to buy Fiji water that they produce in their own country. Yeah, the Resnick family are fucking monsters. That's the wonderful company. They are monsters. And
the pomegranate fuckers.
yeah. So that's really it's they're watching their own home. They're basically being used as workers to strip mine their own homes. And so, you know, step one is stop. And then step two is, okay, well, we need to organize and to, you know, really be masters of our own destiny. And a big problem with the belt is that because all of these factions among the belt have been created, and the implication being is that those factions were created by design. These are groups of people who work company to company.
Let me roll back here for a second. Is the OPA like a monolithic thing?
No.
Explain the factions a little bit, because this becomes like more important later on, but I think it's an interesting thing to talk about here, that the OPA isn't like the UNN. It's not one world government.
I mean, it's very tribalistic. It's almost completely limited to the ship or fleets that these people are on, because they are, you know, basically the worker teams. And then, you know, when you are working in such dangerous conditions for corporations and governments that do not give a shit about you, the only people you trust is each other. And so at some point, you know, these groups get made, and the leaders, basically the people who've survived the longest, end up, you know, becoming the elders. And then through that kind of each faction kind of has their own personality based off of just the people who managed to live through these heinous conditions. And then through that, you know, at some point people start saying, I'm not going to take this shit anymore. And then through that, they start talking to each other, and these different factions start talking to each other, even though they don't really like each other. and then through that, that is how the process of the OPA begins. That like the A is alliance, and that means, hey, we didn't like each other before, but fuck these guys, right? Like that's basically what the OPA is,
Yeah.
and
The enemy
that's
of my
how
enemy.
it started. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And you know, it really, you know, shows like as far as their culture, it's clear like they've developed their own language, and it's almost a language of languages. And you know, through that, you know, you can see, you know, through Miller's journey, because he's able to speak Belter, and you really start to get a sense very, very quickly that the people in the belt are very much a different people and a different culture, and almost, and especially with their bodies changing, they're almost a different species as Earth and Mars. Like, you know, with, like I said, you know, with Mars, you go to Earth, you have a bad time, you're disoriented, you might need some drugs to not vomit. If a Belter goes to Earth, they're going to start fucking withering away and dying.
Yeah.
And so that's, you know, kind of how the OPA came to be, because it was, you know, nobody will have us, so I guess we'll just have each other.
Yeah.
I thought that one of the really fun details that came out in the most recent season is that apparently at least some of the OPA factions are basically just giant polycules, and that's just how they roll.
I mean, what else are you going to do on a spaceship where like literally it takes weeks to transit between stations? If not, like you might spend your entire life on a ship. You might only visit Ceres or Pallas or Tycho, one of these jewels of the belt, a couple times in your life. It's expensive to dock there. You have to have a reason to be there. Most of your work is out in zero G. Like
brothels overcharge.
Well, and you're you know, when it comes down to it, like there are people who are born and die on what aren't generation ships. Like they're born and they die on what the equivalent of a super tanker is. Because like you might only live to be 15 or 16, and maybe your whole life is just doing a couple of runs between Mars and the belt, transporting water or other raw minerals. You're essentially a, you know, the dancing people in the Titanic movie. Like you're not an upper decker type person. You're somebody who's just there to do the work, and that's all you're able to do, because you don't produce your own air, you don't produce your own water. You're dependent on corporations coming from like the Earth and Mars to do that. But before I get into that too much, Chris, tell me about the Martian Congressional Republic and what it is they're trying to achieve and how they fit into this struggle.
Well, so Mars is, as you describe, as has been described a little bit in the chat going on here, and thank you, by the way, Rachel, for tuning in. We're loving this conversation. Mars is very much like the Roman Empire.
More people should chat with us. We want the engagement. Engage with us.
Engage with us for sure.
Play with
also,
us.
The topic of sex in zero G actually shows up in the first episode.
Almost immediately.
Yeah, it's like within the first few minutes of it, which is interesting because apparently, just as a little side note, there's a lot that gravity does for sex, and apparently it would be a lot more, shall we say, energy consuming to try to procreate in zero G. I think that they would probably find some elastic bands might be useful for some certain activities, but let's not get into that too deeply. The point here is that so the Martian Congressional Republic is all about collecting the resources that it needs in order to transform Mars into a version of Earth that is more I don't want to say egalitarian, because it is also hyper-capitalist. It's funny that there is no there's no socialist groups that exist in this society outside of the OPA factions, who are very much of a when you help each other, you therefore your bull runneth. It's something along your bull runneth over. I forget the.
Well,
the,
I mean,
the
in Mars, it's a little Starship Troopers in that like service brings citizenship type of vibe.
Yeah. But at the same time, like it's all about like one of the troopers in season 2 is from a family that basically owns like all of the terraformers on Mars. So it's all about who controls what resources, and that is very much a lineage based, kind of like a fiefdom within a. So it is extremely Roman when you look at it. Because it's all for the good of the state, but at the same time, there are extremely wealthy and powerful families within that state that control a lot of things. But the military is really how the power structure in Mars is focused. Like, that's, if you want to be powerful in Mars, you are a Marine, you serve in the Navy, you do very much the Starship Trooper service guarantees citizenship. Everyone's a citizen, but like, you got to go your route. And the people who go into the sciences and do the terraforming are also extremely valuable, but they're not the ones running the show. Like, they run the technical, bureaucratic side of it, but all of the power brokers are former Navy, former Marine. Like, that's their shtick. Like, they run that shit. And so it is extremely, extremely Roman in so many ways. That is really the best analogy for it. So it's Romans in space.
Yeah.
And
I
their
think
whole
that's a good
goal,
way of putting it.
absolutely. Their whole goal is to turn to build to the point where they don't have to live under domes, because they very much in the same way that the members of the OPA are confined and restricted in their experience of how they live to just being on a spaceship. On Mars, you're stuck living under a dome. So there's this basically not I guess it is agoraphobia, right? The fear of open spaces. It's a disorienting experience for people, and it's a thing that is touched on a couple of times throughout the series, that it's just weird to be not in a very enclosed space if that's where your entire life is held. Martians don't suffer from it the same way that people in the OPA do. And all Belters. Belter is the term for anybody that's not necessarily part of the, shall we say, not militia structure, but like the rebel alliance, as it were, that exists within the Belt. That's the OPA. But the people that just live in the Belt are not all OPA. They could just be Belters who are just trying to eke out an existence. But the OPA is the resistance faction that lives on the Belt. And is doing their thing. They suffer from the agoraphobia at a much different level than, like, if they're station bound or whatever, versus people living out in space. None of them have any concept of what it's like to live on Earth in the way that we just take for granted.
Yeah.
But yeah.
When it comes to Mars as well, they're locked in a technological struggle with the UN, militarily with the UNN, which is the United Nations Navy. And because Mars has a population dedicated to one project, they're able to leap forward technologically faster than the Earth, because the Earth is trying to feed about 30 billion people without enough resources to go around, without enough jobs. So there's a lot of malaise on the planet Earth, a lot of stagnation. But Earth is still the birthplace of humanity. It's still the main center around which the rest of the solar system orbits, as it were. But the UN is also frail. It's very bureaucratically overbuilt. It's not responsive to its people. So they're constantly facing off against the Martian Congressional Republic to be the dominant power. And both Mars and the UNN want to keep the Belt under control, because the Belt can kind of be analogized to the global South, but not in the same racialized way that we have. In a sense, the Earth cannot exist without the exploitation of these other two planets. And that includes Mars. Like, Mars is responsible for a lot of the technological leaps that Earth is able to benefit from. But both Mars and Earth would not be able to do what they can do if it wasn't for the cheap mineral mining that was happening in the Belt. And as we see this play out, we find that the things we take for granted now, the things that are valuable to us, things like gold, those don't matter so much in the space future we're moving into. You know what's really valuable? Lithium's really valuable. Why is lithium valuable? Because no new lithium will be created since the beginning of the universe. The stars we have now aren't heavy enough to create it. And you need a shit ton of lithium for expensive batteries to get you through space that will last for hundreds of years, to build you spaceships and to build you space stations that will allow you to leapfrog out into the cosmos. So what we have here is a wealthy but stagnant aristocracy, a vital and a fast-moving imperial militaristic core, and a young, vibrant worker class, all locked in a struggle, confined within the static solar system. And then into this, like, ready to be existential war that's about to explode, some very interesting and unplanned technology drops and upsets the entire balance of power and becomes a wild card.
Drops.
And so, yeah, that's what we're going to be
New tech just dropped.
That's what we're going to be exploring. New tech just dropped into the solar system, quite literally. The gravity well just pulled in some new tech. But so we're going to be exploring that through these next couple of episodes. For the next stream that we do next Friday night at 7, we're going to be watching Dulcinea and the Big Empty. The first 2 episodes. We're probably going to be doing 2 to 3 episodes like for one of these streams. We can't spend like too much time going plot point by plot point, but we do want to get like the broader overarching themes. So as we quickly round towards 8 p.m., I just want to say thank you all for like who've tuned in for this first kind of initial broadcast. We are going to be putting this up on SoundCloud for those of you that like listen to the podcast, because why the hell wouldn't we do that? But with that in mind, we're also going to be looking at some Christian Avasarala's best dresses, because like that woman can dress.
We are going to have many
costumes
segments.
Yeah, exactly.
Segments.
Exactly. So before we go, though, I wanted to turn over to Chris and then to Logan. Any parting thoughts before we go?
There was something that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to really touch on, that people don't probably quite grasp, is that building big spaceships on Earth is next to impossible, because it takes an incredible amount of energy to get out of, as you phrased it, the gravity well. If you think about it, if you want to build something big and do a lot of stuff in space, it's extremely difficult to do that where you build it here and then you launch it up into space and it does its thing. That's why the colonization of the moon is such a core part. Like Earth and Luna as a system is how it's referred to for the UN. Like that's the main body, and the moon has millions and millions of people living on it, and it's an incredible resource. They don't really show that much of it up until the 5th season, but that really fundamentally is how Earth is able to project power into space, is because of the moon. Like we wouldn't be able to do what we do as the UN from an Earther perspective without the moon. And I just find that, like, again, the fact that all of this stuff is so rooted in the actual science of what it would be like to do space colonization is what really just like sold me on, hooked me on the show in the first place. But yeah, the class warfare is really what brings it home and it makes it resound within my heart. Whenever the Belters are doing the Belter things, I'm always cheering for the Belt every step of the way, even when they do some pretty fucked shit, because that does happen a few times.
A few.
But yeah.
And
Logan.
then Logan, closing thoughts.
I'd say my closing thoughts is, The Expanse is not just hard sci-fi, but also hard sci-fi politics. And with the concept of, it's way into the future, that couldn't, we'll do things differently. I mean, when you look at the way that corporations in this show are effectively governmental entities unto themselves.
Yeah.
And we just had this week a bill put forth in Nevada that directly states that corporations will be able to, in very specific zones, be able to run and form their own government. And if you combine that with what Amazon's doing in Alabama, which is basically they
just got blocked from that. They got blocked. They are not allowed to stop the labor election.
Yeah. But what they did to try and stop it, they're not going to get punished for it. They just got told to stop. And then when you combine all that with what we're already seeing with the spread of Prop 22's influence, when you put those 3 ingredients together, what you get is the Belt. That's what you get. And so, it's with The Expanse, it's not just hard sci-fi. It's not just the science of it. It's also hard politics. I mean, I remember on the Twitter account, I think it's Ty who runs the James S.A. Corey account, because Daniel has his own. But I remember him stating something along the lines of, the only way for Earth to have gotten together like this is for a monumental global climate catastrophe. And that is very, very true. And it is one that we are hurtling toward. And it's very rooted in things that can happen, and in some cases, very much actually will happen.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you
Star
both
Trek
very
is not
much
our
for...
future, folks. Star Trek is
Yeah.
not the future.
And look, Chris knows, because he is the only one of us who has stuff in space, because we no longer broadcast TV waves out there. So this will never reach the stars, but Chris has stuff in space, so we can trust him. But I want to say thank you all again. Yeah, I want to say thank you all again for joining me. I will see you both next Friday at 7. Like I said, your homework is to watch the first 2 episodes of The Expanse, and then don't stop and just keep watching the rest of it, because it's really, really good. I'm going to take a break here for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and play some Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, because I'm feeling sci-fi and I want to be a fucking Jedi.
Yeah.
And that's hard sci-fi, right? Right, Chris? That's Star Wars, yeah?
Space Wizards, yeah, that's a thing.
No, but it's fun.
Exactly.
You can totally get a laser to just stop and be a sword, right? We can do that.
I actually have seen footage of, there's this dude who gets a ton of money to build these crazy projects, and through laminar flow, he was basically able to create a super hot plasma torch. Which is very
Not
cool.
quite the same, but very cool.
It also requires a big ass fuel pack or shop like hose connections to get the fuel to run into it. But you can create a plasma sword. You just can't really move around with it.
Yet, Chris, I'm gonna get myself some Goliath armor. And I'm going to see you guys back here on
the
Friday
Goliath
night.
armor is very realistic, though. Honestly, that's one of the things that I loved about this is, like, Aliens has it, The Expanse has it. Everybody realizes that putting a person into a suit not only fucking rules, but it's definitely a realistic thing that people are going to do, because it dramatically improves your ability to lift and move around heavy objects, because heavy objects in space are still heavy. They'll float, but there's inertia. It takes a lot of work to move them, so you're still going to need mech suits, and I'm so here for that. You have no idea.
All righty, guys. We'll come back next week for more nerd shit, and I'm sure we'll have some more interesting, like, weird facts to explore.
But the fashion segments are going to be so much fun. It's going to be great.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in, y'all. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, friends.